Thanks for joining. We have Sean here to talk about what to do if a seller refuses to pay buyer's agent commission. And I'll just continue to admit everybody into the room, but cool. Sean, take from here.
All right. Well, good afternoon. I almost said good morning, but good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. There's a little talk on whatever we're calling it, the NAR settlement and commission, and have a little chat on that. So have just a relatively quick PowerPoint, 13 slides in all. For those of you who've been in my classes before, I always started with telling you how many slides there are because that's the first thing I always look at when I attend these things, how fast we're going to get through it. And then as I usually start each meeting, oh, you know what? Let me do my share screen. That would help. Okay. Are you guys looking at a 30-year fixed rate chart? Okay. So I just as people are kind of cruising in, usually just pop in here. So just to give you a feel of where we're looking at on a 30-year fixed rate, over the past week and a half, we've been kind of just in the sixes, back and forth between the sixes, high sixes and low sevens, depending on the buyer's qualifications, their credit score, some first-time home buyer programs. So generally speaking, you're going to be right around 7% and hopefully sneaking into the sixes. We've got the 15-year and 20-year rate. I will pay special attention to a 20-year. This week, I have two buyers who went with a 20-year rate at 6.625 and 0 points. It's a program we're pushing and been a nice little niche for us. One of those was also 15% no PMI. So my buyer was doing cartwheels. I almost said literally, but I don't think he was literally doing cartwheels, but he was really excited. He was on the other line. For all I know, he could have been doing cartwheels, but I know he was very excited. So if you're kind of curious just what's happening in the market, reach out to Chris, Don, or myself. But yeah, we'll jump right into the little presentation here next. 1 second for the slideshow. Okay. All right, so I'm not going to get into the NAR timeline. We've all seen this effectively for 6 months, give or take. And then I know a lot of changes are going to be going into effect in August. July 1st is when I think if I'm not mistaken, the KW buyer's representation is going to be completed. So I'm going to just touch on a few things as we lead into kind of the premise of this, which is, what happens when a buyer has to pay commission. The seller won't. What options do we have? So there's not a ton of options, but we'll kind of just address that. And what I would absolutely encourage anyone to do, whether you're about to sit with a buyer for the first time to go through your buyer representation, or obviously you're at the closing table, or you're talking with a listing agent, if there's anything you think we can help with, whether it's answering just a quick question for you or kind of a consultation. I mean, really, this is agent buyer stuff for the most part, but obviously, if it's going to impact the lending, or if they're kind of curious if XYZ happens, what happens with the loan, just reach out. Just hope you all know by now, but my cell phone is absolutely the go-to. Any numbers, or excuse me, any questions you have anytime, just don't hesitate to reach out to anyone. So I had someone leave me a message yesterday. I called them back 7 minutes later, and they were already on their line with Chris. So worked out great. The backup system is working. So like I said, not going to spend any time really on this one, just because the timeline is what it is. So staying with the buyer rep agreement. So I'll probably repeat myself as I often do going through these things, but communication. You don't always know what loan officer or what lender your buyer's going with. They may be pre-approved with ABC and then go to Cross Country Mortgage, or vice versa. So the big thing is when it comes to buyer paying commission, you're going to have to make sure, double check and triple check all the way through that everyone's on the same page. And I'll run through some live examples that we have with ongoing transactions. But I'm sure everyone on this call hopefully opened up the email with the new buyer rep agreement. So I would say this document, we as lenders never have needed or requested, and almost never seen, a buyer's rep agreement, whether one was required or not, because we don't really care. It's not part of the purchase contract, so we never really needed it. Now I might make the suggestion that when you're sending a contract package, certainly to the lender, to the title company, I would encourage you to include this, but it's got to have context because, this form, there might be an agreement between you and the borrower, the buyer, that there's going to be a commission paid of X. But of course, the contract may override that. The contract may have the seller paying commission. So we don't want to, double ding. We certainly don't want to pay a realtor twice. Or do we? I don't know. But we want to make sure that there's not going to be some big confusion at the end that, hey, there was supposed to be commission charge and there weren't, or there was double commission charge and that shouldn't have been the case. So just, we're getting familiar with these forms, and every broker, every company seems to be doing, I shouldn't say seem to be doing something their own way, but there's different versions. So as we kind of get into whatever the new norm is, just communicate again and again. So, and obviously feel free, jump in with the chat. If anybody, Chris, if you don't mind, just keep an eye on the chat if there's anything I should be missing. Kelsey, again, especially you feel free to jump in, especially correct something if I'm saying it wrong. But so this one, for those of you at the Tuesday meeting, I mentioned something like this. So this was just a few weeks back. I mentioned a transaction where there was a commission addendum. I just took a little snippet from the commission addendum. This is not a KW contract, and this is what was included in there. And I'm just sort of staring at it. And again, for those of the Tuesday meeting, I mentioned this flashed me back about 3 months ago when I was helping my sixth grader with some algebra questions because I was lost. If you go to the bottom here, total buyer compensation, A plus B plus C equals 3%. But if I go up top, A plus B plus C does not equal 3%. So even the realtor completing this, I think, in my opinion, had some inconsistencies in here. But if anybody wants to play a little game here, because this is the game that I had to play, and then of course call the realtor to double check. But in this case, this is a $450,000 purchase. Does anybody want to take a guess at how much the buyer's portion of commission is? And I think for those of you I mentioned, I sent this out to a handful of loan officers, just saying, hey, real quick, just do, quick off the cuff. What do you think the commission the buyer had to pay? We got three different answers. So I don't know if there's any guesses out there. So I guess I'll just talk through it. So I guess the quickest way to figure this out is go towards the bottom. Total brokerage compensation shall be 3%. So the buyer's real estate agent's brokerage was getting 3%. So what I had to go back up top is say, okay, well, seller agrees to pay 3% of the first 100, 2% of the balance. So in essence, I had to do the math and come up with 1% of the balance. It's $3,500 for anybody keeping score. But this, like I said, the way this reads, there was a commission being paid from the seller, a commission being paid from the lister, and then the balance to the buyer. So you could see how anyone can get lost in this. And once you see multiple different versions, it really gets a bit more complex. And oh, by the way, you'd be surprised how many times we get a contract and don't get all the addendums. So you really have to make sure that, whether it's you as the buyer agent, or I would say the listing agent, or on the admin team. Believe me, I love working when there's an admin person. It's their job to make sure we have each and every document. So we love seeing that. So in this case, this is just one example of something we've seen out there. So I'm jumping ahead. So here's how it shows up on the closing disclosure, the final settlement statement. Again, this is a 450 purchase. So on the right-hand column, the far right, without anything highlighted, that's the seller's column. So 14,850 was paid to the list agent. Line H06, that's the commission paid towards the buyer's agent. So 10,000 came from the seller, 3,500 came from the buyer. So I think this is pretty easy to kind of talk through. Any thoughts or any questions on that so far? No? Okay. So here's
I've got a question here. Once the price is set, why not use the actual dollar amount owed by each party rather than percentages?
I agree. I think that's a good way to do it, where you have to be careful. And this is just like when you have seller to credit X amount of dollars towards buyer's closing costs. There's some people who say 3%. Some people will say $3,000. I think putting the dollar amount is a better way to do it. That way everybody's on the same page because, we're talking buying agent, listing agent, lender. There's also the title company. The title company is as important as us in knowing these numbers because all these numbers are going to show up on that final settlement statement. So I would agree putting a specific dollar amount probably is good. But what you have to keep in mind is, if after the home inspection, the price drops from 350 to 345, that math is going to have to be done all over again. And you want to make sure everybody adjusts that. Here's kind of an example that sometimes we run into as loan officers that we see from time to time, where it says, the contract says, seller to credit, 1% towards buyer's closing costs on the first page of the contract. Great, perfect, everything's good. And then 2 weeks later, it says, after the home inspection, seller to credit $500 towards closing costs. Well, from a contract standpoint, the way an underwriter reads that is, oh, no more 1%. It's only a $500 lender credit. So it really explicitly has to be written out like the underwriter and loan officer is a third grader. Seller credit to be increased from 1% to 1% plus $500. And I would suggest putting the dollar amount. So I personally would agree. I think the dollar amount is probably a better way to go. Or in this next slide, I'll show you a little bit of both. So here was another transaction that I currently have, and in this one there was a for sale by owner, and they were, there was a deep conversation about how commission works and what the seller was willing to pay. So the verbiage that the agent put in there, and I think this is perfect. Buyer agent commission to include 2.5% compensation. So this particular property ended up at $720,000, and the I got to double check my math. I think that after they give you 2.5% of that, I think it comes out to be $18,000. Feel free to correct me if anybody has a calculator open. And they said they were only going to pay that, or excuse me, I'm sorry, $10,000. So the seller was going to pay $10,000 and the buyer to contribute the remainder. So the math worked out to be $8,000. So obviously, that conversation is had between the buyer and the buyer's agent before I'm, putting any documentation together, but it was pretty much spelled out pretty clearly. Of course, I had to do the math, 2.5% minus that. So there's, could have been a little bit more detail, I suppose, in there once the price was set, but that was the amount that was written in because the price was still variable at that point. Now, once the contract comes to me, we have a live application. We the lender have to put any costs that the buyer is paying, the exception of home inspection, anything else, all inspections for that matter, anything that the buyer is paying has to show up on our loan estimate. So as everybody knows, once you start an application, we have to send a slew of mortgage documents. And there is the loan estimate, which is the binding document that we as a lender have to provide that shows the rate, the payment, the closing costs, APR, PMI, and then itemize out every single cost, including commission. So, if somebody, just blindly received this and said, okay, great, I'm buying a house for $720, let me just scroll to the end of my paperwork. Oh, wait, I'm paying $21,000 in closing costs. That will sound off an alarm. And the reason that is because the real estate commission, again, what the buyer agreed to pay here, $8,000 is showing up in there. And the broker fee, the $249 broker fee also shows up in here. Now, obviously, some teams are different, realtors have different amounts on there. Different companies sometimes have sometimes there's no broker fee or brokerage fee. Often there is a much higher one. So I'm perfectly happy to see $249 on here. But just know that those costs do end up in there. So I had a realtor. He said, hey, my buyer said your costs are like coming in a little higher than you estimated. Can you send me a breakdown? And I say, yeah, and just so you know, the third highest fee on this estimate is the $9.99 lender or realtor brokerage fee. So, or $9.95. So that's their reply was, oh, you guys include that? Of course. Yeah, it's now a closing cost. So realize that all of those costs do show up in there and they show up as an estimate. The important thing is for the buyer to know this is coming, that commission. So again, all about communication. I know it's a tough conversation that you may be having when, the seller is not going to pay commission, if and when the seller's not paying commission. But, and by the way, I should have prefaced it with it. This conversation is certainly going down the road as though the seller isn't paying commission. Obviously, it may be the case where just about every transaction you have, the seller is paying commission, kind of the way it's always been done or traditionally been done. But just, obviously we're going down the path of when that doesn't pop up. So any questions on this?
Scott had another good point. He's saying, so the pre-approval must also include possible commission.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're anytime I'm doing, Chris, Don, myself, and frankly any halfway decent loan officer, when we're doing an upfront pre-qualification, in addition to saying here's how much you qualify for, here's what rates are, here's what payments are, we say, hey, here's what closing costs are. Now we've got to add a little bit more to that, and this is often, if let's say I can see Jeremy's face on here. Let's say Jeremy, nice to see you, Jeremy. Let's say Jeremy's at an open house this weekend, and it's kind of a quick conversation, just about, oh yeah, kind of going through the motions. When you're buying a home, first step in the process, talking to a loan officer. I have a fantastic loan officer by the name of Sean Hadley. He's smart, charming, handsome. I mean, doing the whole Jeremy kind of rundown there.
Don't forget witty.
Witty. So then they call me on Monday. So this is something, it's sort of like, okay, well, as we're getting into it, yep, first time buying a house, $200,000 home. Okay, you need 3% down, and then closing costs on top of that. Well, how much are closing costs? Let's say $5,000 or $6,000. Now, do I jump in and say, oh, by the way, you might, and it could be another $6,000 on top of that for your buyer's agent commission. And that's where the conversation can take a hard left turn. What do you mean agent commission? And sort of like, oh geez, here I am, the loan officer, trying to explain an NAR settlement from 8 months ago. That's going to be kind of walking on eggshells. So hopefully, and even then, how do I say that? Well, the seller's probably going to pay your commission, so you don't have to worry about that. I don't know. So these are scripts and dialogues that we really haven't worked through yet. So it's going to be, for me, a little touch and go to kind of help establish that comfort zone. And Jeremy might say, hey, by the way, Susie may be giving you a call and give me, how much of how in depth their conversation went. And, this is something I'll kind of learn more from you as agents as, hey, what's our delivery? And again, I probably aren't going to just shoot right from the hip going, just telling everybody, hey, assume you're going to have to pay commission, just add 3%. I'm going to more kind of say, hey, you know what, if I'm really educating the buyer for the first time, I'll let them know that, hey, they'll want to have that conversation with their realtor sooner than later, which, oh, by the way, hopefully that's maybe more of a soft intro to get into your buyer rep agreement and all of that. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling here because I don't really know the script that we'll have, but that's something new that we have to sort of, deal with as well. And the last thing we want to do is, have a buyer sort of, kind of lose momentum with that buyer as they're going through this process by thinking, oh, geez, the closing costs can be twice as much as I thought because of the commission. Again, I'm going to be the first to say, hey, you may not have to worry about that. The seller routinely has been paying commission. That may indeed still continue, but just some changes that may be coming. Go talk to Jeremy about it. Again, my delivery will be a little bit lighter than that, but in so many words.
And then I'll throw her back to you so you can answer more questions when I don't know the answer.
And between the two of us, we'll put one full brain together. Yeah. Anything else in the chat there, Chris? Chris is muted.
I'm muted. Sorry. Scott mentioned script. Basically, I'm thinking he's saying, telling the buyer that's an important question, probably talking about commission amount or more. Can you afford? How much commission amount could you afford? Let's sit down with my loan officer and we'll work through the options. So it's going to be kind of a joint effort, I think, because we're going to have all the numbers, and we're going to see how much they have in the bank, how much they have in their 401k, how much they actually want to access, and we'll probably have to kind of relay that to you guys of, well, here's how much we actually have to play with. Because my thinking is you're going to have some first-time home buyers out here that they're coming up with just enough to get a down payment, and we're trying to plan, well, can we get a seller credit for closing costs? that hasn't even started the conversation of commission. So we're going to probably have to put our heads together a little bit on some of this stuff.
That's actually a good segue for my next slide here. And that's a big thing. Yeah, I'm going to keep saying communication and kind of that, working together in tandem, just to, ease that conversation for both sides and as well with the buyer. So I put a real, just simple, basic, generic scenario here. So this is kind of, what we see today. So this is taking just a very simple $200,000 house, seller paid commission included. So kind of just, a normal traditional sale like we've seen without any seller credit. So a lot of this conversation we lean, obviously first time home buyers generally are the ones coming to the table, the most tight on funds. We've got some grant programs, things like that. We'll talk about that later, but they're usually probably the ones thinking we're most sympathetic to them right now because, oh geez, it's tougher to ask the seller for closing costs. You have to come up a little bit more out of pocket. Now the commission conversation gets a little tougher. So just to walk through just a very easy $200,000 house, the buyer's putting 3% down on a conventional loan. Let's say closing costs are $5,000, and they certainly could be a bit more than that. But just to kind of, put in black and white here, buyer would need about $11,000. So there's that. Now let's take that one step further. Let's say you've got a $200,000 listing. Let's say that seller, lister, whatever you want to put it, is not offering buyer commission, and you're in a position to say, hey, unfortunately this house doesn't, again, you've got a better delivery than I would, but the seller isn't, paying commission, that's something you'll have to come up with out of pocket. Here we go. So there they are saying, well, I'm only buying a house for 200. I'm only putting $6,000 down. I got to come up with $17,000. That's a stretch. That's basically putting 3 times what you thought you needed for a down payment and all the other costs and fees. It gets a little pricey. So reminder, where is the buyer able to come up with fees? And for different programs it's different, but generally buyer can use their own checking and savings. They can use investments. They can use retirement assets. They can get a gift from family. There's grants and some gifts, but and that's a big thing. Over the past couple of years, we've got more grants and gift programs than I've ever had before. Well, yeah, I would say ever had before. The only thing that compares was the $15,000 tax refund, but that wasn't money people saw at the closing table. They saw that on the tax return. So so this example here is the big shift, where when you have that that perfect situation, when the stars are aligned, not necessarily in our favor, where the seller is not paying commission, the commission's got to come from somewhere, and the buyer doesn't have the funds. That's going to be when someone's really pinched. So what do we do there? So this next one is what I would say, right up until COVID, extremely commonplace. Okay. All right. We have that same $200,000 house. So, hey, good news. The seller's paying the commission here on this one. So this is kind of like, still the way we do business now and have for the most part traditionally in the past. But saying, all right, seller, I'll tell you what, I want to get $6,000 back from you. Give me a 3%, or let's just say $6,000 credit back towards closing costs, prepaids, and or points. What does the seller typically do? Say, you know what, I'm good with that, but let's bump the price to 206. Seller bumps the price to 206. They're netting the same. 206 with a 6 credit is the same as 200 with no credit. Seller's fine with that. They run with that. My buyer, of course, they're going up $6,000 in price, which means their loan amount's going up almost $6,000. So it's a roundabout way they're financing it back in, and their payment is going up. With today's market, going up $6,000 in price is going to add about $40 to the monthly payment. So most buyers are thinking, all right, yeah, for an extra $40 just not have to come up with 6, I'll do that. So buyer, kind of summarize down here again, 3% down, $6,000, $5,000 closing costs, $6,000 commission. Oh wait, they still got to come up with $5,000, or excuse me, I'm sorry, $11,000. So everybody follow me there?
Hey, Sean, something on that too. Oh, did someone else have something? Chris?
I was just going to cue you up.
Oh, perfect. Thanks. No, I was just going to say, and something else to think about with this too, is that when you're having these conversations with your clients, yes, they're paying $6,000 more on the price, but we can also have the conversation of how long do you realistically think that you're going to own the home? Because that $6,000 is actually being spread over 30 years, if that's a 30-year mortgage. So they might, I mean, yes, they're paying interest on that too, but they might end up actually paying less on that commission because it's in the loan versus upfront in cash. So that's just another scenario of talking about, like, realistically, we know that most people do not own a home for 30 years.
Mhm.
Right. So that's just something else to think about. And again, depends on your client, depends on how much they're into the numbers side of things, but it's just a basic level conversation you can say, just to kind of help them wrap their heads around it too.
Yeah, you can make numbers dance in some cases, sometimes almost a fib a little bit, but even just to kind of, sometimes that spells it out. Sometimes I have the advantage when I'm doing the application, when, say, oh, where do you currently work? Oh, I'm an engineer at Lincoln Electric. It's like, all right, well, we might as well just start talking in spreadsheets, because it's all going to be about dollars and cents. I know between my wife and I, one is more shopping for curb appeal, and me, I'm more shopping for payment, things like that. And use us. Obviously, you can certainly run your own numbers, and example I always often get is somebody says, oh, well, someone, your rate's 0.05% better. That's cost me $10 a month over 30 years. That's $3,600. And they say, all right, like, you're really going to have this mortgage for 30 years? I mean, I don't want to argue, but you think you'll be in this house longer than 5 or 7? That's the average, and kind of pare the math down that way too. So, yeah, great point. So, now, one thing before I jump to the next slide here, remember, when we go up in price to 206, that house is going to have to appraise for 206 in this given example. So with my next slide here, this is kind of going to the extreme. Okay, well, I'd rather have the seller help. I had a little typo here. I jumped it a little bit here, but so, all right, I'll tell you what, seller, you offer 200, and me buyer pay my own agent's commission. What if we kick it to 212, and you cover my closing costs and my commission? I have a typo here because the credit's more than the closing cost, so I apologize. Let me see if we'll come back. So yeah, there's $1,000 number off here, but basically I think you get the point. Jumping the price $12,000 to cover all commission and closing costs. So the buyer's down payment, again, same thing here. I have $6,000 as a down payment. Technically, 3% of 212 is going to be a little bit more than that, but I'm looking to put these out level. So if anybody wants a copy of this, I'll dial it up a little bit before getting it out. But the end of the story here is, you can add in to the price, or I should say, let me reword that. The seller can rework the price to, pay the buyer's agent commission and the closing costs. But again, we're looking at that 212 price, higher price, slightly higher down payment, slightly higher monthly payment, and of course the house will have to appraise for that 212. So unfortunately, when you start going down this road, if you've got a 40% down buyer versus a 3% down minimum buyer, even if that 3% down minimum buyer has a higher price, if both loans are contingent or both offers are contingent on appraisal, sometimes they're a little bit more nervous about that lower down buyer who's, pushing up the price. So anyway, I'm rambling again a little bit there, but does that make sense? And forgive me for the math not adding up here. I can tidy that up, but that's really the, how is, if the seller's not already offering to pay the buyer's agent commission, it can be worked back into the price through negotiations and paid that way. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Let's say if the agent's saying, well, I'm supposed to get $6,000 commission, it could be $3,000 paid for by the seller and $3,000 paid for the buyer, like the scenario back up here, the first sale by owner that was kind of being split, whatever it is, 60-40 or whatever the math works out to be. Any comments or questions?
I think something we have to keep in mind or remind sellers of, depending on how this hashes out, which nobody really knows, and I think it's going to evolve over the next 3 to 6 months at least, is that the current prices in the market are based on 2 commissions being paid. And if we start seeing, the need for what we're talking about here, Sean, we're going to have to bring sellers back in and say, hey, this price was based on a full commission being paid to both buyer and seller agent. the price is not the price now if you're not paying both. There's got to be some kind of adjustment, and I don't know if we're going to see that or not, but it's worth, thinking about.
Well, I agree. I mean, the part, just, I will get, everyone's got a soapbox, and one little one is just sort of like, with all these changes, I'm sure the thinking from somebody somewhere who made, part of the decision making on this is, hey, you know what, these commissions are driving up prices. So now if commissions not being paid for by the seller, prices will come down 3%. Yeah, that's what's supposed to happen. Does anybody see that happening? I can imagine. I just don't see that happening from a seller standpoint. They would want to get their hand on every nickel. So that's one frustrating part. And then the other part, if I'm a listing agent sitting, in a University Heights 3-bedroom bungalow that might be perfect for a first-time home buyer to walk into, and I'm going to list it for 150 and say, but I'm not paying buyer agent commission. I know there's not a sign out front that says not paying commission. It's not on the MLS necessarily, but ultimately, if I'm telling a seller, hey, we want to expose your house to as many buyers as possible, and all of a sudden with a little asterisk, but saying, but for that first time home buyer who's scraping their funds together, they're now going to have to pay an extra 3% or X amount of thousands of dollars. You're kind of narrowing your pool of buyers. It's kind of similar to saying, well, I'm not going to take any FHA offers or VA offers. Well, guess what? 24% of all the loans out there are FHA or VA. If you're saying no FHA or VA offers, you've just taken your pool of buyers down by 25%. So you're limiting, you the seller are limiting your pool of buyers by doing something like that. So that's kind of an angle that I might, take if I were a listing agent. So for what that's worth, I don't know if I'm on the mark there or not. You guys know better than me, but that's kind of my thinking. Up
Is there somewhere, do you have these stats available, Sean, for like first time home buyers? What percentage would be, first time buyers using FHA?
Yeah, Chris,
I'm going to pull an article. Last year, they made up like 48% of active buyers were first time buyers. So like if you're listing right now, I mean, you're cutting the pool of people in half. That might change as rates go down and some more people get back in the market, but they're making up a huge, huge chunk. And let me find that article and I'll put it in the chat.
And along that same vein, maybe you guys kind of know this just offhand, of first time buyers, what is do we have an average down payment dollar amount? I know that can really vary, in Ohio versus like California or Colorado purchase price, and first time buyers seem to have a lot more money nowadays, but do we have an amount that, people are typically bringing to the table for down payment, first time buyers?
Chris, I don't know if you have off the top of your head, or if you have anything. I can try and get that and maybe redistribute that at one of our meetings. When we did that mastermind, I think in March, the one in Middleburg Heights, there we had a stat from there. I have to go back and look it up, but it's the average down payment has increased more or less by necessity because of just having to put more skin in the game to be considered with more offers, but it's still not as much as you think. So we'll have to go back and dig that up. I know with all the morning, the three of us get all inundated with like morning stats, both internal and external. So we can try and pull something together there. And Chris and if Don, if you're on there, feel free to chime in if you guys have anything more to add on that.
I don't have anything to add on those numbers, but what we need to keep in mind here is these sellers, most of these sellers are going to become buyers again. So they need to remind the seller that you are now going to be a buyer, and if if you're not going to offer a commission, don't expect the next purchase you make for them to offer a commission. So I think it's also educating them on that aspect here.
Good point. Yeah, I'd be interested. I've heard a lot of like, on the fringe, being outside of, the coaching calls and all that a lot of you are on. So yeah, at some point I'd love to hear kind of insight on the scripts and dialogues that you guys are going to be putting out there too. So we've talked about this in a couple of meetings, and I kind of, indirectly referenced it here, but a huge, saving decision by Fannie Mae, by Freddie Mac, by FHA, VA, and USDA. So seller concessions, that is, a seller giving the buyer, a credit towards closing costs, prepaids, points, buy down, short, permanent or temporary buy down, those are all considered concessions and there's caps. So when all of this kind of went down, there was a pretty immediate panic going, well, wait a second, buyer commission is not obligated to be paid for by the seller. Now, if a seller pays that, is that considered a concession? And the big answer is no. So what I mean by that, so let's take a VA loan here. So in case you're not aware, the max seller credit on a VA loan is 4%. So just to use a nice round number, on a $100,000 house, a seller can give a $4,000 credit. Well, until, the rules are changing officially August 8th, but as it stands right now, a seller credit of 4,000, well, VA is a bad one to choose an example on, but let's just say hypothetically, that $4,000 credit can only go towards closing costs and prepaids and then commission when it's allowed, but the commission doesn't count as a concession. So let me stay away from VA because that was a horrible example. Let me go to conventional investment, 2%. So $100,000 house, and the maximum concession is $2,000. This is for an investment purchase. So if the seller was paying a concession, if the seller was paying the realtor fees and it was going to be $3,000, the way the rules were originally set up, that's already a problem. The seller's not even allowed to pay that 3% because it exceeds the concession. Well, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac said, no, we're fine with that. Buyer agent commission is not considered a seller concession. So you can get the seller credit and have the seller pay commission. Those are okay to do. Did that word salad make sense to anybody? I don't know. Hope so. Okay. Now, VA, again, the good news here, and again, this is why VA was a bad example. Up until now, or I should say up until August 8th, a buyer is not allowed to pay commission. A buyer is not allowed to pay the brokerage fee. They're not allowed to pay their agent a commission fee. It was 100% not allowable. Now, as of August 8th, it is permissible. They're saying temporarily. I'm going to guess it's going to be temporary for almost ever, unless the rules change again. But now VA buyers are allowed to pay for agent commission. So again, I'll say that's a good thing because otherwise, veterans already have a little bit of an uphill battle because everybody thinks the VA inspection is the worst thing in the world. It's not. We'll save that for another presentation. But if the veteran was not able to pay any commission, it's really going to hamstring. So they can pay commission; it is allowable. The admin fee, that $249, brokerage fee, up until August 8th, that's not allowed to be charged. Now, I don't know if the broker, if the real estate world is going to start now charging that to veterans. On one hand, you could say, well, it's for a service being provided. Why not? On the other hand, I like to think of it as a nice little reward. Veterans had been getting for all these years. Why not let it keep rolling? But that'll probably be industry wide. You'll see people kind of, swaying one way or the other is my guess over time. But anyway, the takeaway here is a seller paying the buyer's commission does not count as a concession and limit what they're able to give towards closing costs. So any questions on that? Don or Chris, do you want to correct anything I said wrong there? Good.
No, you're good with everything.
Yeah.
The VA does get complicated though, as far as what the seller could pay. So I'm glad you backed out of that.
Yeah, I almost wonder if they might change all these numbers after this all becomes official. It's interesting.
Yeah, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, VA have made virtually no changes other than kind of, defining, that this is allowable, and have had made very little to no other changes regarding this. My guess is they'll let the changes happen, see, kind of let the marketplace sort of work itself out. I had a conversation the other day. I said, all these changes coming, there's all this like stress and drama and what about this, what about that? And the comparison we made, it's sort of like getting married a year out. There's so much that has to happen. There's so many decisions you have to make, and so much thinking and going back and forth, and stressing out. Whereas if you're getting married in 2 weeks, all that work's getting done in a short amount of time, but somehow there's a lot less drama because it's only 2 weeks, and you get there, you get married, you write that big fat check, and it's over. So that might be a leap, the analogy I'm trying to make here, but so much time and speculation about what's going to happen. There's all these different thoughts and ideas, and who knows, once this all comes out, it may very well be that, it's, for the most part, it's business as usual. And every now and then you get a seller who's, not paying the buyer's commission. And then, we've got to go through down these other paths. But the big thing, communication again and again and again. Tips, little pointers, and obviously feel free, please chime in, on here and outside of here, just a ways as an industry, both as, loan officers, lenders, what we could do to better communicate and kind of make this seamless, and vice versa. So forward commission agreement and or addendum to title lenders early on. So as I mentioned, just saying, hey, here's a contract and the buyer's rep agreement, that may not be enough, because the contract may not tell us, is the seller paying any of that? Is the buyer paying any of that? I imagine something like that, that little snippet I had of the commission addendum might become the norm, but just make sure we have every page, and anytime there's a change, obviously to the price or a seller credit, or something that the commission's being reduced or increased, you have to make sure your lender is aware, as well as the title company. And here, if you don't mind me jumping in here, I'm jumping into my own presentation here, but who you work with is key. I mean, again, let me go down the road of stupid analogies again. And a lot of you have heard this one before, but theater and real estate. Don's laughing because he's so sick of this one. But if you put 5 great actors together, and all of them have done Shakespeare for years, and they're doing Hamlet, or I don't know, Romeo and Juliet, whatever play, they know all their lines, they know the storyline, it's probably going to be a pretty good play. But if those 5 actors have worked together for 5 years or 10 years and then 1,000 plays together, you're going to get a much better performance, and you're going to get a standing applause at the end. So I always say, the 5 actors in the real estate play is the realtor, that's the star of the show, co-star, loan officer, the title company, home inspector, and home insurance. So those are the big 5. And if those 5 actors are working with each other day in and day out, it's going to be a much better, presentation, a much better flow, and a much better experience for that fan, for that customer. And then you throw in something like this. Hey, this whole NAR settlement, this is like, the fire alarm going off in the middle of the show. So everyone's got to scramble, figure out what the hell we're doing, and, get each other's back. So anyway, that's my silly little analogy, but, knowing who you're working with and getting into a routine, me knowing how, how Jeremy and how his typical agreements are looking, and what he's telling buyers and all of that, that's all key. So again, just make sure every single page of that document is provided to the lender and to the title company. Make sure to have that commission conversation before the buyer sees it on the loan estimate. I know it's going to happen. I mean, you'd be surprised how many times I'm going line by line through a loan estimate with a customer, and then they see that $249 commission or admin fee. Well, what's this? I thought you guys don't have any extra lending fees. It's like, nope, this isn't mine. This is your realtor's brokerage. Now I have a nice little delivery, so doesn't sound like it's going into the realtor's, wallet without, any conversation. But that is a conversation absolutely to have, certainly about the brokerage fee, and absolutely about kind of the commission side of that, because, when there's people going to be signing things right and left, you never know who's getting into what, as far as costs and such, and just want to make sure that's upfront. So, and of course, we communicate, just keep everyone in the loop at all times. When I see like a contract coming over for Liz, for example, I love it, because I know nothing's going to slip through the cracks. I know if Liz is working on as the admin, the contract to close portion of it, I'm not going to just get something on the day of closing. Oh, you didn't see that $3,000 seller credit that was added 60 days ago? It's all going to be kind of, lockstep. We know exactly what we're going to see. So just be extremely thorough, both with your conversation, with your communication and documentation. And, we'll go through it. I think, once all this transition happens, I feel like it's not going to be as tough as probably some of us might have expected over the past 6 months, but I'm anxious to kind of get there and deal with it and talk through it. So, any thoughts or questions you want to add on to this? No. Kelsey, did I say anything wrong? My compliance officer is a corporate, so thankfully they're not on this. I don't know if from your office, if there's anything that says, yeah, you want me to get a text from you afterwards?
No, I think you're good.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you botched it. No, I thought it was really good. I mean, honestly, I feel like this is super helpful just from a real life conversation of like how these things can work, how it can go into the, concessions versus in the loan versus cash, all the different scenarios. And I think that the more we have the education around this, the more that we just have the conversations around this, the less it's going to be as scary. And like Sean said, just being as thorough as possible is the most important thing with this. So, we talked about the percentage versus the flat fee, sending that over. I think that in the beginning, it's just a good idea to make sure that we're being as clear as possible on all of it and double checking the numbers, because at the end of the day, if title has something different than the lender has versus what you have, making sure your escrow instructions are correct, even if you use a TC, double checking that for yourself, like all those things, just being really, really hands-on in your deals, I think is going to be the most important thing. And then having these conversations with your clients on the front side versus on the back side, where it's not going to be a shock for them, come closing time and they don't realize that that's the case. So no, I think this was great. I really appreciate you doing this. Would you guys agree? Helpful? Super helpful for everyone on here? Awesome. Got some thumbs ups. So
yeah, and we'll especially during the pre-qualification, pre-approval, if you worked with any of us, usually you might get a call. Hey, Tremaine, it's just want to let you know, I just got off the phone with Joe. Everything looks good. He goes with some documents before we do a pre-approval, but he's qualified up to 200. We talked to, he's got enough for down payment, but might need some help with closing costs. We talked real quickly about commissions and all that, but I'm going to leave that to you. So we'll kind of let you know what insight we have, or if it's sort of like, hey, this person, their credit's fine, but they got $300 in their bank account. We're going to try and come up with a grant, whether it's short-term, long-term, we just want to, keep that communication pathway knowledge going both ways. So, so that's all I have for the presentation. Does anybody have anything else you want to add?
I'm just wondering who I am in this theater show of yours, if I'm more Daniel Day-Lewis or John Wilkes Booth.
You're clearly I can't remember the character's name, but we're definitely somewhere down swingers with that. So wait, who's the tall guy from Swingers? Who am I thinking?
Oh, Vince Vaughn. I get
Vince
that.
Vaughn, yeah, you're clearly Vince Vaughn.
It's not the first time I've got. Thank you, Sean, Don,
Yep.
Chris.
All right. Thanks, everyone.